Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Urban Legends video. Another entry in my series here, again based on your suggestions. This time, once again following the theme I had asked for about cursed items, cursed objects. And my last video I actually kind of drifted away only because when I was talking about the Count of Saint Germain, it was so fascinating that I just had to share it. But in this case, I'm back to the theme, and this is a good one. I mean, talk about the idea that if there's anybody who has a curse placed upon them, it's coming from somebody that they killed. And this curse eventually led to this man essentially being captured, being put in jail, and then dying a few years later due to an epidemic. But all in all, essentially getting his revenge on the person that he most likely killed. And what I'm talking about here is the curse known as the Greenbrier Ghost, although this curse essentially only happened to one person. So I couldn't really call it, like, let's say a curse that's ongoing. Instead it was a one-time circumstance. But man alive, this is like that famous short story, The Telltale Heart. It's the idea where somebody does something very bad. He puts this thing away thinking that nothing will ever come back to him regarding it. And then little by little, this very thing he put away slowly starts haunting him, either directly or indirectly, and then it eventually leads to his very own downfall. Very, very fascinating stuff. The Greenbrier Ghost is a true story. It's in fact the only known case where testimony from somebody, in this case involving a mother, testifying that it was her daughter that came back as a ghost and told her who her murder was accepted. Not in a direct manner, because the testimony itself was not necessarily accepted by the judge directly, but in indirect manner it was still accepted by the court, and it was not thrown out. So very fascinating stuff. I'm going to talk all about it here. You have to go back to the 1800s to get an idea of where this started, around 1890s, somewhere around there. And this happened in West Virginia, and it had to do with the unfortunate death of a young woman named Zona Hester, who you'll see a picture of here. Now, she was just your average woman there of the time. She was born there in Greenbrier County, West Virginia. She grew up there. It was only a couple of years later, when she was a young woman, that she met a man who went by the name, and this is a long one, of Erasmus Stribling Trout Shoe, although for sake of this particular podcast I'm going to just call him Shoe. And when he met her, they got together, they were married, and then they lived happily ever after, at least for a short time period, because later on she became dead and he was the number one suspect. What's interesting to note is that when they had met, there was an instant like between the two of them. But with regard to Zona's own mother, a lady by the name of Mary Jane Robinson Hester, she was not too fond of this guy's Shoe. Think of it like the mother-in-law. She immediately had a bad sense about him. And the reason for this was because Shoe, when he first arrived there in West Virginia, he came by as a drifter. He was just somebody who was coming into town for the first time, not a known local there, just somebody that was a person from another place, came by, looked for work as far as a blacksmith, wanted to start his whole life over again. And when he did so, that's when he came across Zona, and they got together. She fell in love with him, he fell in love with her. But something was not settling right with the mom. She hated him. She had an instant dislike of him. There was something that he was hiding that he was not telling, that she could sense. But by this point, of course, his daughter was too infatuated with him, would not listen probably to the mother. And then that was that. They got married, and again they lived happily ever after. Well, cut to a few years later, and this is on January 23rd, 1897. They were still husband and wife, and he was working as a blacksmith at his location, when he told a boy who worked at that location with him, tell him to please, run by my house, see if there's anything that my wife needs from the store that's nearby. And when this boy, Andy Jones was his name, went running to the house to try to find Zona, he found her all right, but she was there dead, lying on the floor at the bottom of the stairs. In fact, the way it was described was she was stretched out with her feet together and one hand on her abdomen and the other lying next to her with her head turned slightly to one side with her eyes wide open and staring. In fact, based on that description and based on the location, it made it seem like Zona fell, let's say, from the top of the stairs to the bottom, did something, maybe she cracked her head, maybe she hit the wrong place, but did something where she instantly died at the bottom. The young boy, upon seeing this dead body, he ran to his mother's house. The mother summoned both a doctor and a coroner. His name was Dr. George W. Knapp. He came over, but considering the time period where there's not cars there during that time, everything is either purely by walking or taking some kind of horse cart buggy. He didn't get there to the house in about an hour, but guess who was there beforehand? Yes, it was the guy, Shu, the husband. He had arrived beforehand, and not only had he arrived before everyone else, but he had taken the body, moved it, which is against, of course, anything involving evidence, moved it from the bottom of the stairs up to their bedroom, placed the body of Zona right there on the bed, and then not only that, but he undressed her in a sense and dressed her back into something far more proper. So I know it sounds strange, but from one perspective, if you're looking at it that he's innocent, he did this because he did not want people to find his wife, his now dead wife, in a awkward position right there on the bottom of the stairs, in, let's say, bedroom clothing maybe she might have had on. Instead, when people would come over, he wanted to make sure that she was dressed correctly, and make sure that when she was being examined, as everybody would come over in a little bit, that nothing was embarrassing. That's, of course, if you're going by that he's innocent. If you're going by the fact that he's guilty and he killed her and he wanted somebody else to find the body first and make it seem like he was all innocent, like his alibi was that he was someplace else at the time that she died, then obviously this is the notion that, yes, he sent somebody over to find the body first, and then once that body was found and it was reported to others, he quickly hurried home, made sure to take care of things as far as the body, the clothing, the evidence, everything that's needed to make sure that nothing ties to him. And then that way, when everyone else would come over, he would be there playing the perfect part of, let's say, somebody that was grief-stricken, somebody that was completely in shambles, because that's exactly what happened. When people came over, and especially this doctor, Dr. George Knapp, when he came over to try to examine the body for the cause of death, this guy Shu carefully stayed by his wife's body at all time. In fact, not only did he dress her to make her more proper, but at the same time he added a high-necked dress, like a collared dress, reaching up all the way up to the top of the neck and covering everything. And on top of that, he placed a veil over her face, probably to hide some very incriminating things, which I'll talk about here in a minute. When this doctor tried to then examine the body for the official cause of death, apparently Shu was sobbing and was acting so bizarrely, like he was in such grief, and I say that sarcastically, like he was in such grief, that every time this guy Knapp got close to the body, he would yell, like he would actually react violently, so much so that eventually the physician just gave up. He didn't examine the body fully at that time. Instead, he just gave up, he left, and he listed her official cause of death as everlasting faint. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but again, if the idea is that she fainted, and let's say it was on top of the stairs and she fell down and then this killed her, then that probably could be tied. He also listed it as childbirth, although it wasn't known if Zona was pregnant at that particular moment also. But the key thing was this guy Shu made sure the body was shown, but at the same time not carefully examined. And then when anybody came to try to do so, he made sure that nobody could get close by without him violently reacting to them, and that led to the ultimate result. Dr. Knapp concluded a different cause of death, not incriminating this guy's shoe, and then that was that. Not so for the mother, though, because again, this mother, Mary Hester, she was not convinced at all that this was a natural death. In fact, when she was informed of the news of her daughter's death, apparently her face got really, really dark. By the way, you're looking at a picture of the house where Zona was killed. It's kind of creepy, actually, when you think about it, because from the outside it just looks like a regular home, like it was just like any other home, something that you would not pay much attention to. But it's kind of creepy where, let's say if you were looking at that home at the same time that somebody was getting killed, but you're not realizing it because from your perspective it's just a regular looking peaceful home. It kind of gives you the creeps, doesn't it? But in any case, back to Miss Mary Hester, the mother. Her face got really, really dark upon hearing this news, and then she screamed, probably at the top of the lungs, that the devil has killed her, probably referring to this guy's shoe for this. Now, cut to a few days later, and it was time for the proper burial for Zona. There was a coffin made, but it was unfinished. The husband, again, this guy's shoe, he made sure that neighbors were around. He made sure that people could come for the funeral, but at the same time, he took extraordinary care to ensure that he was, again, right beside the body, and then also making sure that if anybody tried to get too close to the body, he would find ways to not let them get that close, not to examine anything as far as especially the facial area. In fact, they cited that people that were there at the funeral stated that there was fairly bizarre behavior coming from this guy's shoe. He would switch between showcasing extraordinary sadness to finally showcasing just crazy energy. Nobody could get again close to the coffin, so much so that when people were still, trying to make sure that they could see the body up close, maybe try to kiss it or pay some final respects close to the body, he placed a pillow specifically on one side of her head, and he placed a rolled up cloth on the other. Again, very bizarre behavior. I mention all this too because the people there are not stupid. They're seeing this. They're seeing the crazy behavior that this guy has, and they're especially seeing that he's doing this if someone is trying to get really, really close to the face. And so people are starting to talk. People are starting to think something else is going on. It was so much so to the point that he eventually had to tie a very large scarf around Zona's neck, again, purposely covering her entire neck. And he explained in great amount of tears to everybody that he did this because it was always Zona's favorite. And finally, the only time that people were able to get a really close-up view of Zona's body was when it came time to move her corpse straight through the cemetery. And when they did so, they noticed that there was a strange looseness to Zona's head, and that's when people really started talking. The mother, of course, Mary Jane Hester, she was having none of it. She knew that he had murdered her, but she didn't have any proof. She didn't have any evidence as to him being the cause of the murder. All she could do at that point was just seethe in anger at this guy's shoe for what she perceived as somebody killing her daughter and then essentially getting away with it. She did a little bit of tracking on the history of Shu, and it turns out that he was actually married twice before. This was his third marriage. And this is very purposefully said because his first marriage ended when the wife kind of divorced him because she was beaten savagely by him. And then his second wife apparently went through a mysterious death. What this death was, nobody still could say, but nobody was able to do any further questioning on her death or ask him, because it was at that point that Shu left that town that he was in and then eventually went to West Virginia, where he met this woman, his third wife, Zona. So another interesting thing is the mother, Mary Jane, upon again seeing her daughter there in the coffin, she decided to remove one item as let's say a keepsake of sorts. It was the sheet within the coffin itself. For some crazy reason, she was trying to actually return it to Shu, maybe as a final peace offering of sorts, maybe to try to get him to confess, who knows, but he nonchalantly refused it, which again seems strange, because here he is grieving over his dead wife, showing and purposely making almost a fool of himself to ensure that everybody can see how grief-stricken he is. And yet when the mother comes over to actually share something straight from the coffin, maybe give it to him as a memento, he refuses it. So she took it back home, and then this is where things start taking a weird turn, and this is where the cursed aspect comes in. When she took the particular sheet home, the one that was used within the coffin, she noticed that there was a strange smell to it. I don't know if she was expecting another smell, because again we're talking about a dead body here, but she noticed it was at least far unusual than it should be, and so she placed it in a location where she could wash it. But when she did so, she immediately noticed that the water inside the place that she was washing turned red, and then the sheet itself actually turned pink. And when the sheet turned pink, then the color in that water that was previously red vanished. Crazy, isn't it? That would be something so unsettling. Here you have something that suddenly made the water red. It turned later the sheet pink, and so when she lifted up the sheet to examine it further, the color in the water that was previously red was suddenly gone. So thinking that there was something strange going on, she in turn boiled the sheets to make sure that there was nothing left in it. And then when she hung it outside for several days, she still noticed that a stain, that reddish stain, that pinkish stain that made the entire sheet pink, could not be removed. She did this several times, and it was still there afterward. That's when she knew something else was going on. She knew that there was a sign. Somebody was trying to tell her something. And for the next 4 weeks, an entire month, every night, the only thing that the mother, Mary Jane, could think of to do was to pray. She said she's thinking to herself, this must be a sign. This must be something as far as a connection to the death of her daughter. So she prayed and prayed for 4 weeks straight for anything as far as that sign to be revealed. And when it did, boy, did it reveal everything. It was actually, and this is again, if you're believing the mother here, it was actually the spirit of her daughter Zona that appeared one of those nights. It appeared right there by her mother's bedside. She appeared first as a bright light, and then finally the form of Zona took place. It chilled the entire room there. By the way, we know all this because Zona would later mention, the mother would later mention this experience with Zona all in court. So what I'm describing here, the mother would eventually tell later on there in court. So Zona again appeared there in her room. She awoken her mother, and she explained over and over and over again that yes, it was her husband, this guy Shu, that killed her. It was him. And to prove this, because she said that the reason why Shu killed her was because, and this is how sick this guy was, whenever he came home one day, he found that there was no supper, like no meat made for the supper that he was expecting, and he was in such a angry rage that he attacked her right there and then killed her. He actually broke her neck savagely, is how Zona put it. And then when that was done, she was dead. And so to prove to her mother that this was how he killed her, she the form of Zona there that night took her head, like the ghost took her own head, And then Zona turned her own head around until her entire face was facing backwards. And that's when the mother knew 100% that's how he killed her. He killed her by snapping her neck, by breaking her neck, and then trying to make it seem as if, let's say, she died by slipping and falling down the stairs. So the mother now was on a quest. She was there to try to make sure that her daughter had vengeance. And so the first thing she did was she went straight to the local prosecutor, a man by the name of John Alfred Preston, and she tried to convince him to reopen the investigation. Keep in mind again that there was nothing charged against Shu because you had an official, that Dr. Knapp, who stated that the official cause of death was that fainting spell. So because of this, the prosecutors had not originally done anything to Shu, even though some of them no doubt probably had some kind of suspicion. They just didn't have the evidence. And so for several hours the mother was there. She tried several, over and over again to try to get this guy, the prosecutor Preston, to do something about it. However it worked. The guy Preston took it over to his boss, and they agreed, and they actually reopened the investigation. And then the reason they did this was not because of her own testimony. I mean, the mother coming over and talking to Preston, but they stated that there was more talk in the community that something was really suspicious about Zona's death, and maybe this was the catalyst, the one reason they needed to truly open it, but use other excuses, let's say from people, other suspicions, saying that it's the right thing to do to make sure that it is done. By this point, though, this guy Shu, he was hearing about this, and he himself was getting a little concerned. In fact, the Dr. Knapp, who was the guy that originally tried to do that examination of the cause of death but couldn't because of his crazy rantings, he was the one that exhumed the body again because he wanted to make sure that this time they could examine it in peace and make sure that the examination is done 100% correctly. Well, this guy Shu was very, very vehemently against this, but there was nothing he could do. Somehow there was a court order for this examination, and if this guy Shu interfered in any way whatsoever, then it would have caused him to face criminal time, and so he left it as is. They brought up back the body, and of course that's when they found, going straight to her neck, that it was broken. One of the vertebrae was broken, the neck was very loose, and the clear cause of death was a killing. And with the only suspect, again, by circumstance, closest suspect being Shu, still no evidence, but the closest suspect being Shu, he was arrested, and then when they found him, he said that they would not be able to prove that I did it, which is strange. If you're a guy Shu and you're trying to prove your innocence, the first thing you shouldn't say is that you're kind of in a way guilty by saying, you're not going to be able to prove that I did it. So it's kind of strange that he said that, but he did. And so the case started. The prosecutors actually, they brought the mother as one of the witnesses, but they purposely did not have her say anything as far as her visitation with Zona that night. Instead, they left it as is without this testimony, this particular testimony, because they wanted to make sure that the jury did not think her as some kind of crazy person at that point because of the experience with the death of her daughter. Instead, it was actually the defense for Shu that brought up that particular night. And the reason, somehow, some way, they learned that she had that experience with Zona, and the defense attorney brought it up because he wanted it to use to discredit. But then here's where the tale takes a very fascinating turn. Yes, sure enough, the mother said, yes, that did occur. That did happen. I met with my daughter. She told me this. She told me that. And when the defense attorney tried every which way to make sure that she seemed like she was crazy, the way she conveyed her testimony and the way she was so adamantly 100% telling the truth, you can always tell, there's this thing when people are convincing enough, when they have 100% truth behind them, there is an unwavering truth to them. You believe them. You and I have all experienced that before, and that's what happened in this case. The mother, she was so 100% adamant about the truth of what she was saying that it embarrassed the defense team. It embarrassed them, because here they were bringing it up thinking that they were going to use it as a way to get this guy Shu acquitted, to make him innocent, and instead the jury was listening to somebody, and this person was 100% convincing them that yes, this was the absolute truth. It was so embarrassing that finally the defense team dismissed her, but that was but the damage had been done. The judge, by that point, having the defense having spent so much time cross-examining the mother, hours is what the indication was, the judge could not legally get them, tell the jury to disregard all those hours of her talking about the ghost of her daughter. He couldn't, because the testimony came because of the mother being cross-examined by the defense. Apparently in courtrooms, if a prosecutor brings up something very bizarre, then the defense has all the right in the world to stop it from happening. But if it's the other way around and the prosecution does not, and instead it's the defense, then the prosecution let's say essentially allows it, then the judge allows it too. They cannot remove it or stricken it from anything involving official court records. And so the judge, as crazy as it sounds, could not have the jury again disregard all those hours of testimony, and because of that, the jury came back with a guilty verdict. They said that based on the evidence provided to them, again, the evidence especially tied to the mother and her testimony of a ghost telling her who the murderer was, they found him guilty. So Shu was arrested, he was charged with murder, he was locked up in a jail, and then that's not the end of the story, because unfortunately, because the evidence was circumstantial, they could not officially charge him, let's say, with the death penalty. Instead, they charged him with life without parole. But this was not enough for the community. They knew by this point, and again, the community being there in the courtroom, this was probably no doubt like the trial of the century for them. Everybody in the community was talking by it. They would unassumedly say yes, the guy was guilty, and then they would be shocked at hearing that he was somebody that was found guilty, but he was not going to be brought to true justice, let's say murdered. I'm sorry, not murdered, but executed. And so because of this, there was a mini, let's say, riot of sorts, where people getting the classic pitchfork, getting the classic sticks with the fire in them, they decided they wanted to instead have their own vengeance against this guy Shu for what he did to Zona. And so they went on a hunt for this guy to execute him right then and there, to lynch him kind of straight from the jail. And it was only because a sheriff stood up to them and said, that's not the right thing to do. This guy's going to serve his life in prison. He was there. He was found guilty. That's justice enough. It was only because of that sheriff that this guy Shu was not killed right then and there. So, cut to 3 years later, though, and if you wanted to know the whereabouts of Shu, he himself died because he contracted some form of disease. It was some kind of measles or pneumonia or something like that while he was there rotting away in prison. So 3 years later, ultimately, he had the ultimate vengeance placed upon him by catching this pneumonia or catching these measles and dying there in jail. In fact, if you want to say that the vengeance was even further for him, his remains were eventually unclaimed. Nobody, no family members, nobody came to his funeral. Nobody came to pay their respects. Everything as far as his whole life and his ultimate results as his body was just there, left in a cemetery. No records, in fact, were kept of where the location of his body remains. So this guy Shu, for what he did, he remains as completely mysterious as to where he rots away, let's say in as a skeleton there in the ground, just completely forgotten. While on the other hand, to this day, that lady Zona, she has a location there that people go to. There's a marker there near and around that area, which you'll see a picture of here, that talks about Zona and kind of like creates a memorial for her. I believe there's also like an actual grave for her that still people visit. So it goes to show that ultimately Zona was able to place this curse on this guy's shoe by essentially haunting him with revealing him as the murderer, and then on top of that giving him the ultimate embarrassment where nobody remembers him to this day, like where he's located. Nobody paid any respects after his death. His body is just somewhere, probably cremated, probably just scattered. It was, who knows. But in her case, even though she was violently murdered, people still talk about her, pay their respects to her, and make sure that she is remembered to this day. Crazy stuff, no? This case, the Greenbrier Ghost, the idea that it was the testimony of a ghost that led to the conviction of a man, and remains the only such circumstance. There was other trials that have tried something involving like supernatural aspects to decide what caused the death or the killings of somebody. Like there's the Amityville Horror, that guy that killed those family members, saying something along those lines. There's the son of Sam. I think he was saying something about some dog telling him to kill people, but ultimately it seemed like it was just him making things up. But this was the only case so far in the U.S. that remains where, again, a ghost came back and told the mother who the murderer was, and a court accepted it. Crazy, crazy stuff. Good suggestion. Sorry for the long video, but this is the kind of stuff where if you hear this stuff, you just gotta share it. And I've never heard of this particular Greenbrier Ghost story before, but it perfectly fits into my urban legends. And so again, thank you for the good suggestion. If anyone has any other info, by the way, tied to this tale, please post those comments, and then that way we'll be able to see any other good info that we can share. So alright everybody, thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.